Hey, welcome back to Two Nerdy Families, where we do the research so you don't have to. We're here still in Bryce's garage.
Make sure that if you haven't checked out our part 1 video that you pause this one and you go check it out right now. So let's get into the video. All right, Johnny, come check this out. So, there was a crack on the back that I glued. I wasn't too worried about the glue on the back. It was a wood glue. If you do anything on the front, I'd recommend getting a good wood filler. I use Plastic Wood X. It's nice because it goes on pink and then turns white once it's dry. And then I just use a really fine grit sandpaper. I think this is about a 200 grit sandpaper, and make sure you do a good sand job. So you can see on this one where I've gone through and I had to kind of get that corner back in there, and there was a couple chips and some dings that I went over, and this has already been sanded. But now after we paint the front with the Bond coat, you won't even be able to tell. All right, well, that's a first coat. I'm only gonna do one coat on the back before we put the protective top coat on it. But what I'm gonna do now is flip these over and we're gonna put 2 coats on, and I'll show you what that looks like. I'm just making sure I get in all the corners, and then using the brush strokes with the grain of the wood. So you can see that these top parts here, they call these the cross rails, where the wood grain's actually going this way. So I'll kind of brush those going this way, up top and down, and then on the rails going up and down, and all the wood grain, just make sure that wherever you're doing your brush strokes, that when it dries, your brush strokes are going with the wood grain. You can kind of see over here. It's like on this part, you can't really see the brush strokes after it's dried, but you can kind of see why you want a second coat. But on the inside, I don't care as much, and I want to make sure I have enough product to cover the outside. Okay, we now have 2 coats on the front side of these. I have not put the protective coat on yet, but they are looking pretty good. So you can just see, it got into all the texture of the wood grain and everything pretty well in all the corners. After the first coat, you can kind of see the original kind of the honey oak color underneath, but after this second coat that I'm just checking out now, I don't know how well you can tell, but it looks like it's pretty well covered now. Now I'm gonna go inside and put a couple coats on the cabinet boxes, take the drawers out and do those, and we'll see how it turns out. I'm also gonna attach some crown molding. So I put a coat on this just to see how it turns out. It looks like it's gonna be pretty good, even though this is a pine versus the oak cabinets. I think it's gonna match just fine. So we'll see what it looks like after I get the top protective coat put onto these. It's kind of a flat finish right now. So I'm assuming it's gonna be a little bit shiny with that top coat. Step 3 was the optional decorative glaze. I didn't try putting any of this on, but I read up on it and looked online, and looks like it maybe adds a little bit of, not necessarily texture. I think the top coat will give you more texture because it's kind of like a glue, but this is, it just changes the hue quite a bit, as I showed you in video 1. So let me just show you, this is step 4, which is the protective top coat. And it's really kind of a glue. You can see how shiny this is now as it's drying. I haven't coated right here yet on this edge, so you can still see that's kind of the flat finish after you get your couple coats on, and then it's gonna look shiny like this. After it dries, it's not quite as shiny. You can kind of see this is still drying up here, but then down here is pretty dry and still quite a bit shinier than the flat finish without the top coat. Like you can see, big difference here. This dries extremely fast, so my tip after a lot of trial and error, this is where you're going to see more of the brush strokes. You don't see so much of the brush strokes here, but after the top coat dries, it's kind of like a glue, and you will see a little bit of the strokes. So make sure on these rails that from edge to edge that you're doing kind of the horizontal pattern, and then on these vertical rails that you're going up and down, as well as in the middle up and down to follow the wood grain. It'll make a big difference after it dries. This glue, I'm calling it a glue, but it's just this top coat. As you're putting it on, it dries super fast, so you got to work quickly. The instructions recommend that you don't go back over some areas like this that have already started to dry, and with experience I can say that they're exactly right. Like, you'll start to, it'll start to stick to your brush and really start to mess up and leave some blemishes that you won't want. So just get a good coat on it and leave it alone. One thing I noticed, that as I was brushing, even on like a dry surface like this, it's really hard to kind of get a coat on there before it starts sticking to the brush a little bit. And I tried a couple different things. What I found worked best is just get a rag and kind of dampen it a little bit with just some water. You don't want it soaking wet, but just get it a little bit damp, and don't push too hard, because it's still, you can see a little bit of brown on this, and that's just because some of that bond coat that we put on, without it being sealed, it'll start to kind of rub off. So you don't want to push too hard, but just get that a little bit wet, and then notice that this like really glides on nicely. And this might look like normal paint or something where it should just glide normally smooth like this, but I'm telling you, it's a big difference here. Like, if I hadn't wet it down, you'd only get about half this far, and it starts to kind of, not really apply very well, and you have to get your brush wet again, and that top coat doesn't go near as far as when you kind of just dampen the surface, and it's a lot easier to work with, and it goes much faster. Okay, so we've done the 2 coats, and now we've actually done the top coat, and we've hung it on here so you can see that we no longer have that flat finish, and it's got that nice shiny, sheen on it, and you can still see all the texture, in the wood grain in there, and but yet you get that, this is the espresso color, but you can add different tints of whatever color you want your cabinets to be. And after it goes on, you still got all your wood grain underneath, so it's quite a bit different from it being, paint. And this is definitely kind of more of like an epoxy-based bond coat. So when it dries, you don't see as much of the paintbrush strokes. And then in our next video, we're going to actually show you putting our hardware on. So I've got these kind of a brush nickel poles, and we're going to show you where exactly you want to mount them on upper cabinets, lower cabinets, and where the placement should be on a drawer. And we'll show you how it looks, and so be looking for that video. Well, that's it from Two Nerdy Families. We'll see you next time.